Ganzo Songju and Shantideva, and 19 Dharma then be young and touch Zawan. Ganzo Songju and Gambara Sapa and Dharma the kind and Lojung and Dambake and Aranga, Sana young the Ganzo Songju Gambake Zawan and Dambake.
Now we have heard how it is necessary in order to bring about the fully awakened state of the enlightenment of Buddhahood, how it is necessary to give rise to bodhicitta, the enlightened attitude, and ourselves being beginners, just taking the first steps upon that path. Of course, the kind of bodhicitta that we have to give rise to is the conventional bodhicitta, the intentional, the bodhicitta of intention, the statement of our intention. Always to remind ourselves of that fact, always again and again to give rise to this attitude which allows us to strive for the achievement of this awakening of Buddhahood, not only for our own sakes, but for the second welfare of all beings. This is what we have to remind ourselves of constantly.
Lama kuma songju sambana song damba
Now, how do we set out in order to implement this intention? This has been described quite clearly in a verse by the great master Shantideva, in which he says, if someone should have resolved to take such upon himself or herself, and if someone should wish to quickly put themselves and others under the protection, then the means that is to employed is to exchange oneself for others. This secret instruction or this secret intention has to be implemented. This means simply that if we should wish to do so, if we should actually wish to implement this attitude, this bodhicitta, and if we should wish to do so quickly, put ourselves under the protection of all the sources of refuge, etc., then we have to exchange ourselves for others, meaning that whatever positive, whatever pleasure, whatever joyful circumstances whatsoever we wish for ourselves, we have to start to wish for others. Whatever negative circumstances, whatever pain, whatever sickness we wish to avoid, we need to take upon ourselves. Now, why is this instruction, or why is this intention called secret? It is called secret because from the time of Salingpa until the time of Geshe Chagarwa, Salingpa to Atisha to Dromtenpa and so forth, this instruction was not taught publicly. It was taught only from one master to one student, and this way it was kept secret. This is why it is called the secret intention. Accordingly, it continues, it says in our text that all the instructions which follow in this commentary by Komtrul Lodhithai, that all of these instructions are nothing else but various implementations of this intention. So whenever we hear in any which way in this particular context of mind training, all the various instructions and explanations which follow hereafter, are nothing else but various ways of how to, explanations of various ways of how to go about to implement this exchanging oneself for others, this making the welfare of others one's goal, while one at the same time strives to take all the pain, suffering of others upon oneself. Having said all that, we now come to the third part of the commentary, which describes the actual main, the actual main practice, that of the 7 points of mind training itself. The first two parts have been explained. Now we move into the explanation of mind training proper. And it says here in the text again that this main part is divided into two major subdivisions. First, there's the general explanation of all the salient features that need to be known. And second, there is complementary explanations from various teachers of the transmission lineage. Now, as we then continue, it says the actual explanation of the 7 points of mind training now start out, and there being 7 points and various verses which explain each of these points, Rinpoche says it would make would make sense if eventually we would get hold of these verses, of these texts. They have indeed been translated, and if we would mark up our text in such a way as to be able to identify which of these verses explains which of the 7 points. So moving into the actual explanation of these 7 points of mind training, first we hear about the actual headings of these 7 points, the titles, so to speak. The first of these 7 is the preliminary part. In this preliminary part, all the Dharma is being taught and explained that we need as the foundation in order to proceed with the practice proper. The second point then is the actual main instruction of how to give rise to the enlightened attitude, which is known as Bodhicitta. And then once we have resolved to do so, then eventually, of course, also hindrances and obstacles will occur upon that path. How to deal with these, how to integrate them upon the path is being explained in the third point. Then, in the fourth step, and the fourth point of the 7 points of mind training, there are explanations of how we would summarize all of these teachings in such a way that they could become the single intent, the single practice for the entire duration of our lifetimes. And in the fifth step, or the fifth point, then there is the extent or the intensity of mind training, how it is to be implemented, how it is to be brought into practice, how we should train in it is being explained. The sixth part explains the various commitments that one takes upon oneself as one embarks upon this mind training. And in the seventh and final part, there are the various pieces of advice that are to be taken into account. Again, Rinpoche says it would be useful to listen closely to whenever each of these 7 points is being explained, is being introduced, so that we will be able to make out which of them is which.
Chakawa yi doji kongli ki song tela thoma hundo dola la tati tsek tega. Ta tela ten ngaron songen dreba jani ki sang ting hundo ndala ni wari. Tenga hundo, tenga na nyomlin seke ki hundo tek tang tani chek danjur nyepa kawa la sopa chek yoni dige tana gambeke tani hundo ni wari.
We now come to the actual first verse of Chakavayesha Dorje himself. The actual root verses of his are worked into the texts, the commentary of Contra Lodotais itself. So the first one says, the first verse of Chakavayesha Dorje himself says, to begin with, practice the preliminaries. And as you start out to practice these, there are 2 kinds of preliminary to be implemented. The first kind of preliminary pertains to the actual practice session, the actual session that we perform while we sit on our meditation cushion and actually perform the various meditations that are to be practiced. And the other type, the second type of preliminary, is the reflecting upon the instructions. Reflecting upon instruction in this case means instructions which deal in all, which serve in order to explain the impermanent nature, to the nature of impermanence, of the various ways how things truly are, etc. So one deals with the actual meditation session, the other is the explanatory part.
Among the Yamsalin, the Toma, the La, Gomsan, and Ricky Gombules, Maronson, Kiola, Mandama, Tonson, the Yetan, David, Dane, the Yetan, the social wrong, Lama, so Yena, the Charge Chala, Zambot Demba, Gola, Zajiton Demba, told me by me, Ninji Jimbu, Yugumba, Tatela, Lama, Jepalama, Tom, Kitchen, then go to Kindu, so the yo so then tell a move going so on there, but Kazanga Demaking, on what I tell. Then there go.
So as we have heard, the first part of this preliminary practice is the actual meditation session, or the actual practical parts, implementation of the meditation itself. And to this end, it is being explained that we start out by way of imagining our own root teachers above our heads. We imagine how above our heads there is a seat of a lotus, a moon disk, upon which our own root teacher sits with a smiling expression, a brilliant appearance, and how he regards us with objectless or completely impartial compassion. As such, we imagine him to be, or we regard him to be, the essence of all root and lineage masters themselves, all appearing in the single shape of our own teacher, whoever that might be. So, as is being said, this is a practice instruction, which says this is to be put into practice. This is to be trained in right now. So therefore, for this at this moment, let us imagine, just as it is explained here, our teacher sitting on this lotus and moon disk, etc., sits above our heads with a smiling expression, etc.
한디 소한데 받는 용돈 된거 Lama Yong Taba Yong Kiwi. Tenga so한데 책이 다 tenga 좀 된거.
Then having imagined our teachers to be truly present above us in this way, we then pray to the teacher. This is the second bit that is printed in cursive script, starting out with the words Lama, Yang Tapa, etc. These we will now repeat with Rinpoche, together with Rinpoche.
Lama Yang Tapa Yong Lama Sowa Tane, and Lama Check, Sanat Latin, Naranga, San Sonju, Senrumboji, Jawar Sanji, Lab, and Sowa Tapari.
So when we pray in this way to Allah, then the meaning of the words that we pray is that we ask Him that extraordinary love, compassion, and enlightened attitude of Bodhicitta may arise within our beings.
Lama Sowa Tane. Lama Deni Naranga, Joe Somboga Ma Penny, and Naranga, Yindi, Weza Kado, Nadon Dambek, Gombodo, Gunapa Papando, Gonkudo. The Gombo the Paka, Kaki Yana, Sekaki Yorawa, or Yemne Gungage, Gota, Gonkuta. Kaduna, Weza Kado, Nadon Damba, Tenda. That Tige, Uso the Lama, Doji Chatunga.
This prayer to the teacher is supposed to be repeated many times, hundreds of times, thousands of times. And once for whatever individual session we have then concluded praying to the Lama in this way, we imagine how from above our heads he enters into our own bodies through the crown of our heads, and how he slowly sinks down to the level of our hearts, where he then comes to rest. We imagine how he rests within our hearts in a sphere of five-colored light, which is roughly shaped like basically a half egg, an egg that's the head of which has been cut off. And we imagine him to be sitting in this sphere of light, radiating five-colored light, and how he resides in this way within our hearts.
Lama Rongi, Tenga Yoti, Samatendo, and Tenga Hundred, Tenga go Tongi, Latin Yamlintina, the Shendini, Garchambo, Nichambo, Yanson.
Now, this particular instruction of how to imagine one's teacher to be present above one's head, how to pray to him or her for that matter, how to imagine the melting, the dissolving of the teacher into ourselves and coming to rest within our heart centers, is an instruction that is of extreme importance, and we are instructed to practice this basically at the beginning of each and every meditation session.
단절 녀바가 저와 마다바 거리 니미 레준지 상바셔보라 책 사바예나 라우름다 제반 시지 예제라 제미서 강구서 당아롱송 루틴다다 담배 추드버세 단절지 밀 대변나 rum보체라 빼야와라 와 rum보체데 라에 온보 자진당 라창바당 콜루저를 잡고는 거 오고 쭉돌라 되는 rum보체 요래마도 대 rum보체랑 인간 아롱서 라라 해고 말와 빼대장도 다당아롱서 추념수 렌터버게 루틴데니 빼내 현대네 좀 단다와 톱가와
Now, having heard how to implement this preliminary practice in the actual meditation session, we now move on to the second part, which is the instructions upon which such meditation sessions are to be based. And then Kongtrul Lodutaya, who comments upon this, continues to explain the first 4 points that need to be contemplated here. The first of these is the difficulty of how to bring about leisure and the corresponding circumstances, which are called riches. The second point to be contemplated is death and impermanence. The third point, or the third preliminary instruction, is that of the shortcomings of continued rebirth within samsara. And the fourth point is that is the contemplation upon, or the reflection about the law of cause and effect. These 4 points, which we are well advised to reflect about again and again, are very basic. Many of you might have heard them already. Nevertheless, it definitely serves us well to hear them again in order to bring about a true understanding of these from the bottoms of our hearts. The first of these is being described as leisure and wealth, or leisure and riches. What is meant with these words? It is meant that what is meant here is that this human existence of ours, this precious human body that we have achieved in this lifetime, is extremely rare and extremely precious. It is likened to a wish-fulfilling jewel, and of course it is common knowledge that wish-fulfilling jewels are not to be found just at every street corner, but that they are extremely seldom. It is even said that within this world there are only 3 of them. One as the crown jewel of the god Indra, another as the crown jewel of the god Brahma, and another one as the crown jewel of the so-called Chakravartin king, the world emperor. So there are only these very few wish-fulfilling jewels within this world, which exemplifies how rare and how precious they are, and in retrospect, how rare and precious, of course, also our human existence is. It is not something that happens just by accident again and again. Therefore, the opportunity that we have at our disposal at the moment, this precious human body, is to be regarded as very rare, very precious. Now, for the time being, it is indeed the case that we have brought together all of these fortunate circumstances, the freedom of negative circumstances, which all together make up that which we call a precious human body. For once, for this time, we have indeed achieved this circumstance. But no one can say how long it will last. It is highly perishable, it is highly impermanent, and all of us have heard of such people who today were very healthy and vigorous, and everything seemed to be nice and good, and there was no cause for alarm in any way whatsoever, yet the next day they were being struck down with a terrible disease, they were sent to the hospital, and a couple of days later they were dead. So in this way the highly impermanent nature of this precious human body is being pointed out, and on top of that, of course, it goes without saying that the coming of sickness and death, the coming of this impermanence is highly unpredictable. Who of us could say that death will come either tomorrow or after so many years? So whenever we remind ourselves of that fact right now at this moment, while we are still in the possession of a functioning, healthy, vigorous body, we should remind ourselves of these simple but true facts and use the precious time that we have at our disposal in order to practice the Dharma. Well, we have achieved this precious human body, but impermanence will strike, death will come, and this life will come to an end. Now, all would be well if that would just be the end of it, but alas, it's not. We are being reborn again within this cycle of suffering, and according to what it is that our future life holds in store for us, we will either be reborn in the hell realms and suffer intense heat or cold. We might be reborn in the realms of the hungry ghosts and suffer from extreme hunger or thirst, or we might be reborn in the animal realm where we suffer mostly from being enslaved, from stupidity, etc. Or we might be reborn in the human realm where again we have to go through the sufferings of birth, sickness, old age, and death. We might also be reborn in the higher God realms, which are predominantly characterized by the suffering of change and yet again impermanence. In this way, it is clearly pointed out that whatever type of rebirth we could possibly gain after we have left our present life, whatever kind of rebirth we could take on within this cycle of suffering, all of them are being characterized by suffering. There is not a single existence within this cycle of suffering that is in any way satisfactory. Now, having heard about these points, we might wonder what is the reason, what is the cause for all of these various existences within this cycle being characterized by suffering. What is the explicit cause of the predominant suffering in each of these various realms of existence? Not dwelling upon the fact what each and every particular little suffering and pain that we might experience, what it might be caused by. Generally speaking, it can be said that whatever suffering we experience within these six realms of existence are invariably caused by our own doing, by our own negative activities in previous lifetimes. Whatever it is that we might have done in a negative way with negative intentions is being relived, is being experienced as future suffering. That's that period. There's no other way around it. Which in turn, having truly understood this, having truly taken this to heart, and having made it an understanding from the bottom of our hearts, will serve to make us avoid, to the very best of our ability, even the slightest misdeed, even the slightest non-virtuous deed in this lifetime. And on the other hand, it will make us strive to, with whatever we do, with whatever it is that, whatever activity it is that we might have to perform, to bring about benefits, to do so in a very virtuous way, and the result of this will invariably be the experience of positive circumstances of bliss, of joy, of happiness. In this way, having understood about cause and effect in this very simple but true way, we may strive to give up whatever negativity there is, and we may strive to exchange it with whatever positive activity that we could possibly conceive of. Kongtrul Lodotaya then continues to explain that, especially for beginners upon this path, it is of great importance to hear thorough, in-depth explanations about these 4 points which turn the mind to the Dharma, and and that they train themselves thoroughly in these points, reflect upon them in a very thorough and a very exerted manner, in such a way as to make these points, the understanding of these points, into a true certainty. Now, having said all that, Kongtrul Lodotaya continues to explain very briefly why it is so difficult to achieve that which we call a human body, or even a precious human body. He explains quite clearly that in order to do so, in order to achieve this kind of fortunate rebirth, it is necessary for us, or for whatever individual that has been born in such a way, to have brought about the accumulation of great merits. Great merits are usually being brought about through virtuous activity versus unvirtuous activity, and in this way there are indeed few compared with however many beings there are as a whole who have indeed achieved such a rebirth. Then, of course, it continues to say, or he goes on to say, that continued virtuous activity will in turn bring about future rebirths of such a type. But if we just look about ourselves, if we look around among all those whom we know, we will very clearly and quickly see how very, very few there are who indeed have made virtuous activity a way of their life. And in this way it is quite clear that among those who have achieved this fortunate opportunity of a precious human body, there will indeed be very few who will again achieve this in the future. Therefore, this the practice of virtue, the avoidance of non-virtue, is that which brings about such a fortunate circumstance as the precious human body. Now we have achieved this fortunate circumstance of being reborn with a precious human body. Everything has come together for us so that this may have come to pass. But this precious opportunity is highly impermanent, highly perishable. is said that even though it is of extreme difficulty to achieve this type of circumstance, this type of rebirth, it is on the other hand extremely easy to lose it again very quickly. As we all know, there is no particular warranty that these human bodies come with. There's no one among us who could say that he or she will live for so and so many years. Death usually rather comes quite uncalled for and quite unpredictably, and this life could be over any moment. As a consequence of having understood, having truly taken this insight, this understanding to heart, actually the only thing that, if we had understood this in such a way, would be to do nothing but Dharma practice. Start with Dharma practice right here, this very moment, at this very place, because we have understood that there is no warranty whatsoever that we'll be able to do so again tomorrow. Now, definitely, impermanence will strike, death will come. That's the one thing that's absolutely for sure. No one of us knows when that will happen, but eventually, invariably, for each and every one of us, it will happen. There's no way around it. Whatever virtuous deeds we have practiced in this lifetime or in previous lifetimes, the result thereof, that will go with us. That will go with us wherever it is that we might be reborn, and we will experience the results of such virtuous doing as happy and joyful circumstances. Also, the results of all of our negative deeds will equally go with us, and we will invariably experience them as suffering. Whereas whatever possession, whatever riches, wealth, influence, fame, etc. we have achieved in this lifetime, all of these we will have to leave invariably behind. There is no way whatsoever in which we could take anything of this with us. All of this will have to be discarded, will have to be left behind when death comes and we move on to our next rebirth. Now, having truly understood that, having truly taken this to heart, having made this conviction of our own, it follows, or it should follow, that we would make now one of two intentions our own, or motivations our own. Either we are motivated by fear from rebirth within the cycle of suffering, or we might be motivated in such a way as to bring about the achievement of Buddhahood, the achievement of enlightenment for the sake of all beings. Whichever of the two it will be, we will then proceed accordingly with our learning, with our practicing. Now, having heard about how to go all about these various points, how to understand these points, when it actually comes then to bring the actual meditation or the actual practice session to conclusion, it is then said that once again we should remind ourselves of the 7 branches, or the seven activities that we have heard about this morning: the performing prostrations, the confessing of misdeeds, rejoicing in the merits of others, asking the teachers to remain to teach the Dharma, asking them to remain for the sake of us beings, not going into nirvana, and then finally to dedicate the merit that has been accumulated through such virtuous activity for the welfare of beings. It is said that all the following instructions, all the following explanations, etc., which are to be put into practice, should be combined, will be compatible with these seven steps and with these 7 branches, and should definitely always be combined with them. Particularly the last step, that of dedicating whatever merit has been accumulated for the welfare of beings, should always be the end point of our practice, so that when we call the formal practice session to a close, we do so on a virtuous note. And this brings us now very clearly to the end of the first topic. The first topic being the preliminary part, which explains all the various fundamental parts, the preliminary parts, how to implement them, and what instructions are the basis of these. So this is end of topic 1. Tomorrow we will then hear about, we will move into the main part of the practice itself. And the main part, as we have heard several times already now, is the actual explanation how to give rise to the enlightened attitude, how to give rise to bodhicitta from the bottom of our hearts.